Oh, hey everyone, Justin here. So, this trip to Queens has been amazing. Last night, Mia and I tried out Korean karaoke. I never would have guessed it, but she sings like an angel. Tonight, we're checking out the Queens night market because I want to find some cool souvenirs to bring back to the family. Mia's on the lookout for some tasty Colombian arepas. We've seen elements of so many diverse cultures here, and we've met people from every continent. Queens really feels like a global community. With so many people from diverse backgrounds and different places living and working so close to each other, there are so many opportunities for these folks to interact with each other. Sometimes it feels like Queens is like a reflection of all the cultural interactions happening on a global level. As we explore more of this corner of the world today, we'll discover how different cultures develop and spread throughout the world, and learn about how this impacts and changes different cultures. Now, I like to think that culture helps tell the story of a community's history and identity. And most times, in order to truly understand where someone is coming from, you need to go back to the beginning of the story. So, where do cultures begin? Thousands of years ago, in places like Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, China, and the Indus River Valley, humans began to transition from a nomadic lifestyle of hunting and gathering to settling down to farm crops and raise animals. These became the first civilizations. And the people who lived in these civilizations began to develop languages, writing systems, agriculture, and religions. What do those beliefs, practices, and traditions have in common? They're all elements of culture. We call these places where cultures originate and develop cultural hearths. And once these civilizations stabilized, they began to spread out. They interacted with people living nearby and conquered new areas. And as they spread out, they brought those cultural elements with them. Other societies adopted elements like agriculture and language. This spread of cultural traits, ideas, and practices from one society to another is a process known as cultural diffusion. But that was so many years ago, and most of the world is already settled and inhabited. Does this even matter in the modern world? Well, yeah, actually it does. Can you think of any modern places where cultural elements like food, fashion, religion, or art develop and originate? Maybe cities like New York, Paris, Los Angeles, or Tokyo came to mind. These major cities with vibrant food scenes, major media companies, fashion houses, and other organizations are modern cultural hearths that help set trends and project them outward to the world. Let's say your local library has a big display of manga, which are Japanese graphic novels. How could you use ideas around cultural diffusion to explain why a display of Japanese culture is in your hometown? Well, you may say that manga's cultural hearth is Japan. And because of cultural diffusion, Japanese culture has spread and become more popular in places like the United States. That increasing popularity and influence led to the books becoming available in your town. Since cultural diffusion is all about how culture travels from one place to another, which of the 5 themes of geography might be best to help us understand how it happens and what the impacts are? That's right, movement. So, what are some of the ways that cultures diffuse? The first way is through migration. Think about some of those earliest civilizations. As people from those cultural hearths spread out and settled in new areas, they brought with them things like crops, writing systems, and religion. Culture diffused. And this is a process that continues to this day. How is this Lunar New Year parade in New York an example of cultural diffusion? Well, the Chinese community living in New York brought this cultural tradition with them when they immigrated. Cultural diffusion also occurs through trade. At its most basic level, trade results in different groups of people exchanging goods. During the Middle Ages, traders along the Silk Road moved spices and other food items from Asia to the Mediterranean region. This led to changes in the food Europeans prepared. Rice moved from China to the Islamic world and then into Europe through Spain and Italy. The final way culture can spread is through communication. Remember, culture is more than just goods, food, and artifacts. Ideas, values, and beliefs are also important elements of culture, and communication can help transmit them across the globe. For example, early Christian beliefs were spread as church leaders wrote letters to different communities. And as communication technology becomes better and faster, these ideas, beliefs, and values can spread further in a shorter period of time. In fact, there's a good chance that this is happening in your world and you just didn't know what to call it. How do developments like the internet and smartphones allow you to connect to other cultures and learn about their art, entertainment, food, or other cultural elements? You might have said that they provide platforms like streaming services that allow you to experience music, movies, and television from other cultures. Social media platforms, email, and text messaging make it easier for different cultural groups to connect with each other. Even things like travel shows and food blogs can introduce us to new and diverse cultures. Let's see if we can make some connections to topics we discussed in earlier units. Back in our discussion of political geography, we discussed colonization, when one country takes full control over a foreign territory and its people. How might colonization lead to cultural diffusion? Well, the colonizers certainly introduced cultural elements like religion, language, and clothing from their home country to the new territory. And the colonizers also take cultural elements like food and art from the colonies back to the home country. But this process has a complicated legacy. Remember, most colonized areas did not choose that path. So when considering the cultural impact of colonization, people should always ask themselves, how might someone feel if their traditional culture was replaced by one they didn't choose? Of course, this doesn't just apply to colonization. As trade, migration, and communications increase in the 21st century, we need to think about how our choices lead to cultural diffusion and consider the potential impacts. But in order to consider those impacts of cultural diffusion, we need to know what they are. Now, as part of cultural diffusion, members of one cultural group adopt elements of another culture they come into contact with. Teens in your town were exposed to elements of Japanese culture, and now they're checking out manga at the local library. But what happens when this occurs over and over? In some cases, cultures become more and more alike in what is known as cultural convergence. Have you ever thought about the different clothes that people wear nowadays? Most people are wearing jeans, t-shirts, sneakers, things like that. Maybe there are different brands, but what someone is wearing in London or Paris or Tokyo is fairly similar to what someone in New York or Chicago would wear. Different cultures are dressing alike. Cultural convergence. One of the benefits of this process is increased understanding and cooperation between different cultural groups. But can you think of any potential downsides to different cultures becoming more and more alike? Take a moment to brainstorm. Well, as cultures become more and more alike, they lose some of the things that make them different and unique. All those folks in different cultural groups wearing jeans, t-shirts, and tennis shoes, those items of clothing replaced more traditional clothing, and a unique cultural element was lost. Not every cultural group adopts elements of other cultures, though. Some choose to reject the processes that lead to cultural convergence. Their cultures become increasingly different or distinct from other cultures, a process known as cultural divergence. Take the Amish, a religious group found in places like Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana. Their entire cultural identity is centered around maintaining long-standing traditional elements. They use horses and buggies to get around. Their clothes are similar to clothes worn centuries ago, and they use traditional methods to farm. As time goes on, their culture looks less and less like the culture around them. And while these choices do have the benefit of maintaining traditional cultural elements, it can be difficult. Many of these cultural groups have a shrinking number of members. What do you think might be some reasons for this decline? Well, as members of these communities see changes to the culture around them, they may find it harder and harder to maintain that cultural identity. So, what does all of this mean for us in the 21st century? We're going to need to talk about the ways that cultural diffusion may impact our diverse cultures. What are areas where cultural convergence enriches the global community? When do we need to protect and preserve certain cultural elements? And these are complicated issues that require a lot of thought and consideration. Wow. That sure is something. This is the Unisphere, and it was built here in Queens for the 1964 World's Fair, which brought together cultural exhibits from across the United States and the world. I think it's a great reminder that processes like cultural diffusion aren't new. They're just getting faster and faster. And because of that, we need to think more and more about how our decisions around migration, trade, and communication are impacting global cultures. In our next lesson, we're going to take a deeper dive into how cultures use language and communication. But until then, remember to keep exploring. Hey.